Welcome on board, chosen one. Try not to blush. I know it hits different when someone finally calls you what you actually are, instead of the nonsense labels your enemies threw at you when they were scared. And scared is exactly what they were, even if they pretended otherwise. You remember the things they said about you, right? The way they acted like you were too much, too confusing, too intense, too quiet, too mysterious. Funny how every insult they used was just a shaky attempt to cover their own fear. They weren't describing you, they were confessing their own weakness. It always starts like that. First they whisper, then they point, then they laugh, then you stop showing up, and suddenly every room feels colder without you. Before we keep going, hit the like button and subscribe to pay this message back. You're part of this mission now, and this voice grows stronger with you here. Now let's talk about the part they'll never admit, the part they'd rather bury under fake confidence and loud distractions. Look who thinks they know everything, they mocked. Look who needs to bow, they demanded. Cute. They expected you to shrink, to fold, to panic. They were banking on the old version of you, the version that gave people more chances than they deserved, the version that took disrespect personally and silence as a wound. They miscalculated. Badly. Because while they were out there showing off, pretending they won, pretending they moved on, something else was happening behind their backs. A shift, a quiet storm settling, a kind of silence they weren't ready for. The universe started pulling things around you like chess pieces. Conversations stopped, rooms changed. People who never noticed you before started paying attention. And your enemies? They started feeling watched by their own guilt, their own lies, their own unfinished business with you. This is where the real story begins. Let me tell you what actually happened the moment you stepped away. The moment you broke the cycle, the moment you refused to be their emotional punchbag, their backup option, their easy target. They didn't celebrate. They panicked. They didn't move on. They spiraled. And the funniest part, they tried to figure you out like you were some kind of unsolved crime. Welcome back, you beautiful enigma. Yes, you. The one they can't pin down no matter how many times they replay your words, your messages, your silence. They sat there scrolling, zooming in on details, trying to decipher what changed in you. They think it's something small. They don't realize this shift has been years in the making. Let me show you how deep it really goes. They hired 3 specialists, not randoms, not amateurs, real professionals, a psychic, a detective, and a CEO. If that doesn't scream desperation, I don't know what does. 3 minds from 3 different worlds. 1 obsessed mission. Figure you out. Decode your essence. Understand why someone like you refuses to break the way people like them do. They wanted a formula, a pattern, a weakness, something they could use to control the narrative again. They thought you were a puzzle. They didn't realize you were the whole damn universe. The psychic sat there trying to tune into your frequency. They couldn't. Something kept slipping out of reach. You didn't show up as a person. You showed up as a moving target of growth, a mind in motion. The detective dug through timelines, behaviors, reactions, except every time they thought they found a pattern, it dissolved. How do you profile someone who doesn't react from fear, ego, or insecurity anymore? How do you analyze someone who's outgrown every version of themselves? The CEO tried to map you like a strategy: risk, reward, motive, leverage. They walked out of that room confused, unsettled, and kind of impressed. Because no matter how they tried to break you down, they found no crack. And that's when the truth hit them. You weren't supposed to be understood. You were supposed to be remembered. This isn't the first time someone misjudged you. Remember your past? The times you trusted too easily, the people who thought kindness meant softness, they saw you as a tool they could use, a heart they could drain, a soul they could bend. But every time they crossed the line, the universe put you through another transformation. You shed identities like old skin while they kept repeating the same mistakes. Years ago, someone else tried to box you in too. They said you'd never become anything. They said you were too weird, too emotional, too distant. Then they watched you overcome things that would have erased them. They watched you crawl out of situations that would have crushed 99% of people. That's when they realized the truth. You weren't surviving. You were training. And now here you are, walking in with a presence that makes people uncomfortable without you saying a word, sitting in silence that tells your history louder than any speech, carrying an aura built from healed wounds and buried betrayals. They can't handle it. They feel exposed just standing near you, because you remind them of everything they could have been but never chose to be. Your enemies wanted answers. They wanted explanations. They wanted a neat little box with your name on it. Instead, they got a mirror showing them every insecurity they tried to hide. This is your era now, and they know it. And since you're still here, Chosen One, let me pull you closer into this mission. You didn't end up in the crosshairs of a psychic, a detective, and a CEO by accident. That kind of lineup doesn't chase ordinary people. They only gather like that when someone like you shakes the equilibrium. So before we move into the next layer, stamp your presence here. Drop a 777 in the comments to mark that you're ready to step into the room they built to examine you. That single number tells me you understand exactly who you are and why they were scrambling behind closed doors. And now we move forward step by step, deeper into the corridors they walked through when they tried to decode you. If you're truly one of the chosen ones, you'll feel it in your chest. That weird pull that keeps you watching, keeps you listening, keeps you unfolding this story because you know it's yours. You know this isn't entertainment. This is a reveal, a file opening, a truth that was kept from you. Take a breath. Hold your ground. Let's step into the next layer of the investigation. Number 1. The psychic who tried to read you and scared herself in the process. Funny how they called you broken, yet they're the ones shaking whenever your name shows up. All right, Chosen One, get comfortable. This part hits like a steel chair to the ego of every enemy who swore they had you figured out. This is where their lies crumble. This is where their fake confidence melts. This is where they realize they weren't dealing with some predictable little character in their story. They were dealing with a wild card, a glitch in their system, a walking contradiction they couldn't decode even if their life depended on it. Let's start with the first fool who tried, the psychic. They brought her in with full dramatic flair because your enemies desperately wanted an answer to the question that haunts them at night. What is this person made of? They wanted someone who could read your energy, decode your past, sense your motives. They thought bringing in a spiritual specialist would give them a cheat code to understand you, because nothing terrifies insecure people more than someone who refuses to behave the way they expect. So there she sat, room dim, incense lit, her whole ritual laid out like she was preparing to summon truths that should have stayed buried. They handed her your photos, your old posts, your journals, every digital footprint you once left behind. She expected to see the same thing she sees in everyone else, that familiar emotional blueprint, the predictable timeline of heartbreak, scars, childhood patterns, coping mechanisms. Except when she tuned into you, nothing matched. She expected a straight line. She met a seismic wave. At first, she thought she was misreading. She reset, grounded herself, tried again. But the deeper she went into your energy field, the more her certainty cracked. You weren't coming through like a person. You were coming through like an entire weather system, a shifting storm, a pulse of something that didn't follow the normal rules. She tried to explain it calmly at first, flipping cards with hands that were definitely shaking more than she wanted to admit. Your energy signatures didn't line up with your timeline. Your emotional field didn't match the age of your body. She said pieces of you felt like you had lived 10 different lives in one lifetime, dying and resurrecting without leaving a single trace that humans could understand. She said your aura wasn't stable because you weren't supposed to be stable. You were supposed to be evolving so fast the world couldn't keep up. You know that question that sometimes hits you late at night? Why do I feel older than my age? Why do I feel like I've lived more than everyone around me? Yeah, even she felt it. Then she hit them with the line that made the whole room freeze. You've been through wounds that should have destroyed them, she said. They should have collapsed. They should have given up. They should have disappeared. But instead, they turned every wound into power. They alchemized every betrayal. Imagine your enemies hearing that. Imagine the silence, the discomfort, the sudden realization that everything they did to break you only made you more untouchable. Their attacks became your upgrades. Their absence became your evolution. Their silence became your training ground. She said your scars were glowing, not metaphorically, energetically. She said it looked like someone had carved light into you. Light born from pain, not innocence. That's the kind of energy only people who've survived psychological warfare carry. That's the kind of energy that comes from walking through darkness without losing yourself. And that's the kind of energy that terrifies people who never grew past their own cowardice. Your enemies wanted her to find your weakness. Instead, she found your transformation. She called you an anomaly, a phenomenon, a moving target that doesn't hold still long enough for anyone to pin down. She said trying to read you was like trying to photograph lightning. 1 second you're here, next second you're a whole new frequency. She told them manipulation wouldn't work on you because you've already lived through worse than anything they could throw your way. And then came the real dagger. She said, if you're smart, you'll stop watching them before they start watching you back. You know why that scares them? Because deep down, your enemies know you're observant. They know you see patterns before they form. They know you sense shifts before they're visible. They know you don't confront people. You outgrow them, and nothing is more terrifying to small minds than being left behind by someone they underestimated. This is the part your enemies don't tell. While they pretended they didn't care, they were secretly analyzing every move you made. While they acted like you were irrelevant, they were quietly monitoring you from fake accounts. While they told others you were nothing special, they were paying experts to decode your silence. She refused to continue the reading, packed her things, declined the second half of her payment. She looked them dead in the eye and basically told them, this person is out of your league. Leave them alone. Because how do you write a report on someone who didn't just survive their past? They mastered it. You walk like someone who's been through silent wars. You think like someone who's rebuilt themselves from ruins. You feel like someone who understands loss but doesn't fear it anymore. You're not fragile. You're forged. And your enemies hate that. They hate knowing you didn't break. They hate knowing you didn't become bitter. They hate knowing the pain they caused you only sharpened you. They hate knowing that every time they expected you to fall apart, you leveled up instead. But here's the sweetest part. They wanted the psychic to give them control over your story. Instead, she gave you the spotlight. She walked out whispering one last truth they will never repeat out loud. You're not dealing with a human anymore. You're dealing with a force. And now you know why they acted strange around you, why they avoided your eyes, why their confidence cracked the moment you walked into a room. Because deep down, they sensed what she confirmed. You weren't supposed to bow. You were supposed to rise. And they were never ready for that. Number 2. The detective who tried to track you and couldn't even draw your shadow. Funny how they swore you were easy to read, yet the man who solves murders for a living couldn't even chart your heartbeat. All right, chosen one, strap in. If the psychic shook them, the detective ruined them. This is the part where your enemies realize they weren't dealing with someone emotional or impulsive. They were dealing with someone who plays the long game, quietly, surgically, like a villain who learned patience the hard way. This section is where your past finally makes sense, where every moment you thought was random reveals itself as training. It hits them, it hits you, and it hits the universe like a warning shot. The detective didn't arrive with crystals or cards. He walked in with the coldness of a man who could reconstruct your entire life with nothing but timestamps and keystrokes, no theatrics, no guesses, just computation. He deals with facts, patterns, behavior, psychological signatures. He profiles monsters, prodigies, liars, geniuses, manipulators. When they gave him your case, he thought it would be easy. Just another complicated human. That's what he told them. Imagine his face when he realized you weren't built like the rest. They gave him everything you ever touched, digitally. Your old searches, your purchasing patterns, your call logs, your messages, your locations. They expected a clean timeline, a predictable arc of rise, fall, pain, reaction. Something human, something chartable. Instead, he got static. He spent weeks cross-referencing your life. He expected to locate the turning point, the trigger, the breakdown moment. Every human has one, but you had dozens, and yet none of them destroyed you. Imagine this. He's staring at a chart that should show emotional collapse after betrayal. Instead, it shows silence. Imagine this. He's analyzing communication gaps, expecting chaos. Instead, he sees reflection. Imagine this. He looks for the moment you lost it. Instead, he finds the moment you evolved. He said, their patterns don't follow any documented human model. Translation, you confuse the hell out of him. Most people, when they get hurt, spill everywhere online. They post, they vent, they rant, they drown their pain in noise. Not you. No. You did something that triggered every alarm in his professional instincts. You went silent. Not quiet. Gone. Digital ghost mode. No posts. No late-night messages. No pity-seeking paragraphs. No attention bait. No emotional outbursts. Nothing. It was like watching someone walk into a void voluntarily. He said your silence wasn't emotional collapse. It was emotional recalibration, a shutting down for maintenance, a reset. You vanished like you were uninstalling old versions of yourself. And when you came back, you didn't come back as the wounded version. You rose like a villain who took time off to sharpen their knives. He said it felt like watching someone die and resurrect in cycles. No external help, no motivational books, no guidance. Just you, your pain, and whatever the hell you turned it into in the dark. You know that question that sometimes hits you. Why do I disappear when I hurt? Why do I come back stronger after every loss? He noticed it, and it terrified him. Every time he tracked a pattern, you snapped it. Every time he predicted a behavior, you dodged it. Every time he mapped your emotional trajectory, you switched lanes. You were moving like someone who healed in motion, not in stillness. someone who grows under pressure, not in comfort, someone who transforms without witnesses. He said, trying to predict you was like trying to chase smoke. You weren't leaving clues, you were leaving decoys. Then came the part that scared them more than anything else, your communication style. He said your messages were layered, multi-purpose, strategic. You're not someone who talks just to talk. Every word you send tests something. Every silence reveals something. Every reply is calculated, not cold, not manipulative, just aware, hyper-aware, like someone who has learned the hard way that every message can be used against you, twisted, misinterpreted, or weaponized. He said, most people talk to connect. They talk to be understood. They talk to feel seen. But this one, he paused there, they talk to learn. Imagine how exposed your enemies felt hearing that. Imagine how embarrassed they were realizing you weren't seeking love or validation when you talked to them. You were gathering intel, seeing their nature, noticing patterns, watching how they react when they're bored, angry, insecure, or losing control. You didn't argue. You observed. You didn't chase. You decoded. You didn't assume. You watched. They thought you were naive. The detective knew better. He called it the most sophisticated emotional self-defense system I've ever seen. Then he dropped the line that hit them harder than any insult. Whoever hurt this person didn't create an enemy. They created an evolution. Imagine the shame that washed over your enemies hearing that. Imagine the guilt they tried to hide. Imagine the sudden awareness of every manipulation they attempted. And imagine the realization that every time they tried to play you, you were quietly collecting data like a scientist studying a dying species. He said, you don't need validation anymore. You don't need praise. You don't need hand-holding. You don't need closure. Everything you do now is intentional, focused, directed, like someone who's seen too much to play small again. You know that thought that whispers in your mind sometimes. Why do I see through people so fast? He had the same question, and now you know the answer. Your psychology was rebuilt in fire. Then he hit them with the conclusion they dreaded. You can't guilt them. You can't manipulate them. You can't isolate them. You can't predict them. Imagine sitting in a room waiting for validation that you won, and the detective tells you the person you thought was weak is actually untouchable now. Imagine the sting. His final recommendation? Leave them alone. They're not a threat unless you make them one. Let that sink in. He didn't say you're harmless. He said you're dormant, calm, quiet, self-contained, until someone is stupid enough to provoke you again. He closed his file, walked out, ignored the massive paycheck waiting for him, because some cases aren't solvable. Some cases aren't meant to be dissected. Some cases are warnings. You weren't a puzzle. You were a crime scene they caused, but couldn't face. You weren't a mystery. You were a mirror they were terrified to look into. And now they know the truth. You're not unpredictable because you're broken. You're unpredictable because you've grown. You're not silent because you're scared. You're silent because you're strategic. You're not hard to read because you're complicated. You're hard to read because you outgrew the alphabet they're still stuck in. He walked away because he realized the truth your enemies never wanted to accept. You didn't just survive what they did to you. You evolved into someone they could never calculate, and that is why they fear you now. Number 3. The CEO who studied you and realized he was out of his weight class. Wild how they said you were insecure, yet the man who trains killers in boardrooms admitted you're the one everyone should fear. Chosen one. This is where the story takes its final sharp turn. This isn't the realm of energy or psychology anymore. This is the territory of power, strategy, leverage, the battlefield where leaders are born and empires are built. And they made the mistake of dragging your name into that arena, thinking they'd expose you. Instead, the CEO ended up exposing them. He walked in with the confidence of a man who buys companies before breakfast, a man who calculates people the way a surgeon calculates arteries. He came in expecting simplicity, expecting a formula, expecting you to be like everyone else he's ever analyzed, predictable under pressure, responsive to incentives, easily influenced if you pull the right strings. Imagine his surprise when he pulled those strings. And nothing moved. They dumped everything on his desk. Every file the psychic refused to write. Every timeline the detective couldn't complete. Every shred of data they hoped would give him leverage over you. They wanted him to find the crack in your armor, the point where you could be controlled, guilted, or manipulated back into place. He didn't find a crack. He found steel. He approached you like a corporate takeover, mapping your motivations, checking your emotional investments, scanning for dependency points, pressure triggers, bargaining chips. That's his specialty. He knows how to use loyalty as a leash, fear as a weapon, shame as currency. Most people crumble the moment you threaten their image, their relationships, their comfort, their stability. But you... Nothing shook, nothing dented, nothing wavered, nothing leaked fear. You confused him instantly. Nothing about you matched the psychological models he's mastered. You weren't risk-averse. You weren't validation-driven. You weren't clinging to status. You weren't chasing approval. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You were living like someone who already lost everything once and survived. He said, "This person operates like someone who's been through absolute ruin and walked out intact." Translation, you've already faced the worst-case scenario, so nothing scares you anymore. Imagine that. Most people fold under the fear of losing something. You became unstoppable because you already lived through loss and turned it into armor. He checked your financial patterns expecting weakness. Instead, he found independence. He checked your relationships expecting dependency. Instead, he found distance. He checked your decisions expecting hesitation. Instead, he found clarity. You weren't avoiding people. You were protecting your peace. You weren't disconnected. You were discerning. You weren't cold. You were done bleeding for unworthy hands. And that made you the most dangerous type of person in his world, someone who can't be bought. You know that question that whispers inside you sometimes. Why do people fear me once they get close? This is why. They sense you don't need them. And nothing terrifies a manipulative mind more than a person who walks away without flinching. Then came the quote that silenced the entire room. He looked up from your files, leaned back, and said, "If I were smart, I'd hire this person, not investigate them." Imagine how humiliating that was for your enemies. They expected him to break you down. Instead, he recommended putting you in charge. He said your resilience was forged, not learned. Your strategy came from survival, not textbooks. Your intuition came from watching people betray themselves in front of you over and over again. You were operating on a level they couldn't train for. You can't teach someone how to rebuild themselves from ashes. You can't teach someone how to trust their instincts after being lied to repeatedly. You can't teach someone how to strategize when every plan in their past was sabotaged. You didn't study resilience. You lived it. He said, "This is the most dangerous person in the room, not because they seek power, but because they no longer need it." Let that settle. Danger doesn't always come from aggression. Sometimes it comes from self-sufficiency so strong it makes insecure people crumble. Imagine this. He tried to map your emotional vulnerabilities the way CEOs map the weak spots of their opponents. Instead, he found blank space, not emptiness, rebuilt territory. Imagine this. He looked for the fears that normally control people. Instead, he found acceptance, someone who made peace with loss. Imagine this. He checked for pressure points. Instead, he found a person who gets calmer when threatened. You know why your enemies hate you? Because they can't scare someone who's already faced the worst version of themselves. Then he dropped the warning that changed the entire tone of the room. Don't try to control them. Don't try to compete with them. And do not, under any circumstances, try to destroy them. Why? Because people like you don't retaliate emotionally. You don't scream, you don't chase, you don't collapse, you outmaneuver. By the time someone realizes they tried to play you, you're already 20 steps ahead, silent, calm, watching them face consequences they set in motion themselves. The CEO told them, "People like this don't fight back in ways you expect. They dismantle you slowly, quietly, with precision, while you think everything is fine." That's the part your enemies never understood. You're not chaotic, you're methodical. You're not reactive, you're calculating. You're not dramatic, you're decisive. They thought you were emotional. You were analyzing. They thought you were naive. You were observing. They thought you were attached. You were deciding who deserved access. You know that question you sometimes ask yourself. Why do people regret losing me so late? Because it takes them that long to realize you weren't fragile. You were focused. The CEO closed the file, pushed the entire stack back across the table, declined his fee, declined the follow-ups, declined the pressure. He stood, straightened his suit, and said the line that still haunts them today. You're not dealing with someone you can manage. You're dealing with someone you should have respected. Then he walked out, the strongest mind in the room, admitting defeat. And that's when your enemies finally understood the truth they'd been avoiding. The psychic couldn't read you. The detective couldn't track you. The CEO couldn't control you. 3 experts, 3 angles, 3 failures. And you? You weren't even trying. They didn't uncover your weakness. They uncovered their own. And now the whole room knows one thing. You weren't someone to investigate. You were someone they should have never crossed. Number 4. The debriefing room falls apart. Wild how they swore you were easy to replace, yet 3 experts with decades of mastery couldn't even agree on what species of nightmare you are to their ego. Chosen 1. Welcome to the moment everything collapses for them. This is the part your enemies never wanted you to see, the scene behind the curtain where their entire operation glitches, freezes, and practically begs for a system update. Because once the psychic, the detective, and the CEO entered the same room with their findings, the whole investigation fell apart like wet paper. Picture it. The lights buzzing overhead, the table covered in files with your name on them. 3 experts who normally intimidate entire corporations suddenly looking like interns on their first day. The psychic walks in first, still shaken. You can see it in her hands, the tremor of someone who stared into something she wasn't trained for. She sets her folder down, but keeps her distance from it, like your existence might open it on its own. The detective enters next, dragging charts and timelines that contradict each other so violently they might as well be from different universes. And then the CEO steps in, jaw clenched, laptop under his arm like a weapon he's too scared to open again. Imagine this. The moment he sits down, the CEO slams the laptop shut, like someone just whispered a curse into his ear. Imagine this. The detective taps his pen on the table once, twice, stops, because every timeline he built falls apart the second he tries to explain it. Imagine this. The psychic looks at both of them, voice barely above a whisper, and says, "You felt it too, didn't you?" And suddenly the room gets quiet enough to hear embarrassment breathing. 3 professionals, 3 experts, 3 different worlds, yet all of them share the same unsettling truth. None of their conclusions match. None of their notes align. None of their findings follow logic. You know that question you sometimes ask yourself? Why do people react to me in ways I don't understand? This is why. Even experts can't place you into their models. The psychic starts explaining first, her finger tracing the strange patterns she saw in your energy. She speaks like she's trying not to insult something powerful. "Their frequency shifts," she says. "You can't pin them to a timeline. Every time I read them, they're different. That doesn't happen." The detective cuts in, frustrated. "But that makes no sense. Their behavior patterns should confirm what you saw, but they don't. They disappear when they should react. They evolve when they should collapse. Every emotional model says they should break, and they don't." The CEO rubs his temples, annoyed and unnerved. "No, you're both missing the point. This person is past leverage, past pressure, past influence. You can't negotiate with someone who has nothing left to lose." The 3 of them go silent again, because they suddenly realize something unbearably humiliating. Your enemies thought you were predictable. These experts just discovered you're not even classifiable. Unclassifiable. That's the word the detective uses. He writes it on the board, circles it, sits back in his chair like he just signed his own resignation letter. The psychic shakes her head. Not unclassifiable, untouchable. Her voice cracks on the last word. Meanwhile, the CEO leans back in his chair, staring at the ceiling with the 1,000-yard stare of a man who's just realized he's been measuring the wrong metrics his whole career. And then comes the first gut-punch quote of this meeting. "You didn't bring us a human." The CEO says it quietly. "You brought us a turning point." Your enemies freeze in their seats. Because what does that even mean? Imagine this from their perspective. They hire 3 experts to expose your weakness, and all 3 return with warnings. The psychic flips through her notes. "Your energy shouldn't exist in this generation," she says. "It doesn't match your age, your background, or your experiences. Either they've lived through things no one knows about, or they've transformed past the normal limits of human resilience." The detective replies, "My data shows emotional deaths followed by rebirths. But there's no external cause, no meltdown, no breakdown, just silence, then evolution." He underlines the word evolution like it terrifies him. The CEO finally speaks again. "You can't control someone who doesn't fear consequences. You can't manipulate someone who doesn't seek approval. You can't intimidate someone who's already walked through worse alone." Then he looks directly at the person who hired them and says the second quote that burns like acid. "You didn't lose them. You failed to understand them." The room goes cold. Because that's the truth your enemies always avoided. They didn't move on. They didn't replace you. They didn't grow past you. They failed to categorize you, failed to predict you, failed to break you. And now, 3 experts are saying it out loud. The psychic pushes her notes forward. "Their scars don't behave like scars. They behave like upgrades." The detective nods. Their absence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. The CEO adds, their heart isn't fragile, it's selective. By now, the atmosphere is thick enough to choke on. Everyone in the room is sweating except the three experts, because they're not scared of you. They're scared for the ones who tried to play you. Then comes the third devastating quote. This isn't a person you investigate. This is a person you prepare for. The psychic takes a deep breath. Everything we tried to measure kept changing. Every layer we uncovered revealed another. They're not unpredictable. They're unreadable. The detective adds, every timeline I built collapsed because they don't respond to pain like normal people. They respond like someone who's already healed before the wound stops bleeding. The CEO closes the folder entirely. Someone like this doesn't rise, they ascend, and when they do, the people who doubted them are the first ones buried by the momentum. Now imagine your enemies sitting there, hearing this, realizing they weren't dealing with a fragile heart. They were dealing with a sharpened blade. The psychic looks around the table. You asked us for weaknesses, she says, but we came back with warnings. The detective nods. You asked for patterns. We found anomalies. The CEO smirks darkly. You asked for leverage. We found independence. Then comes the final quote, the one that breaks the room completely. If you're wise, you'll stop watching them before they start watching you. Silence. No one breathes. Because that's not advice. That's a threat disguised as mercy. The files remain open on the table, untouched. No one is brave enough to close them. No one is stupid enough to continue reading. 3 experts. 3 different methodologies. 3 different worlds. And not a single one could capture your truth. The debriefing room didn't just fall apart. It collapsed under the weight of your evolution. And in that moment, everyone finally understood. You weren't unpredictable. You were uncontainable. You weren't misunderstood. You were unmatched. And they never should have tried to figure you out. Number 5. The risk assessment that turned into a warning. Funny how they tried to label you dangerous, yet the only unstable force in the room was the person who couldn't handle your silence. Chosen one, this was supposed to be the moment they measured your threat level, a neat little chart, a number, a category, but the second the experts sat down, the whole evaluation flipped. The psychic went first, lowering her voice like she was speaking about a storm that hears its own name. They're aligned with the universe's momentum, she whispered. People like that don't attack. They evolve. The detective leaned back, arms crossed, eyes sharp. They don't lash out, don't beg, don't react. They operate in silence, and silence is only dangerous to guilty people. Your enemies swallowed hard at that part. They knew exactly why your quiet terrified them. Then the CEO closed your file, pushed it away like it burned. If I had any sense, he said, I wouldn't cross this person for any price. They're not volatile, they're resolved, and that makes them untouchable. It hit your enemies all at once. The experts weren't evaluating you. They were evaluating them, their motives, their insecurity, their obsession, their fear of someone who walked away with dignity. The final verdict wasn't a rating. It was a warning. You're not a threat unless provoked, but if provoked, they won't survive the consequences. And suddenly, the room felt small, because the real danger was their obsession with someone who outgrew them. Number 6. The meeting whose real target wasn't you. Wild how they swore you were the issue, yet the deeper the experts looked, the clearer it became. The only meltdown in this story belongs to the ones who couldn't handle your absence. Chosen one, this was the meeting meant to dissect you, break you down, name your flaws. But halfway through, every expert in that room realized something unsettling. Nothing about their investigation pointed toward you being unstable. Every path, every pattern, every motive led straight back to the insecurity of the person who hired them. The psychic felt it first. She placed her hand over your file and whispered, "Their energy holds mirrors. Standing near them forces people to see who they truly are." Your enemies stiffened instantly, because mirrors don't lie. The detective followed, tapping the table with the back of his pen. "Their silence didn't cause damage," he said. "Your guilt did. People only fear silence when they fear what it reveals." Then the CEO leaned forward, his tone icy. "You weren't intimidated by them," he said. "You were intimidated by their independence. People like this don't collapse when you walk away. They grow, and that destroys fragile egos." The room went dead quiet, because suddenly every expert was no longer analyzing your behavior. They were diagnosing the enemy's motives, insecurity, and obsession. And the final verdict stung the hardest. "You didn't hire us to understand them. You hired us to hide from the truth about yourself." In that moment, the enemy finally realized the investigation wasn't exposing you. It was exposing them. Number 7. The final verdict they never expected. Funny how they wanted a list of your weaknesses, yet the only vulnerability exposed today was the enemy's need to control what they could never keep. Chosen one, this was supposed to be their victory lap, the grand finale where the experts finally figured you out. Instead, it became the moment every expert collectively turned toward the enemy and told them to sit down, shut up, and stop before they destroy themselves. The psychic was the first to speak. She didn't even look at your file anymore. She just shook her head and said, "This is not prey." Her voice carried the kind of certainty that makes a room hold its breath. "This is someone who has already transcended the wounds you tried to define them by." Then the detective flipped his folder shut. "This is not a target," he said flatly. "Targets react, targets chase, targets break. This one doesn't. They evolve. Every attempt to corner them only sharpened them." The CEO leaned forward, fingers steepled, gaze locked on the enemy with surgical precision. "Let me be clear," he said. "This is not someone you can predict or manipulate. This is an evolution." He paused. "And if you continue watching them, provoking them, or analyzing them, the consequences won't come from their anger, they'll come from their growth. And you're not ready for that. Your enemies finally understood. They thought they were investigating you, but they were documenting their own downfall." The final verdict was short, cold, and humiliating. Step back. Stop watching. Stay quiet. You're outmatched. And just like that, you weren't the misunderstood one anymore. You were the untouchable one, and they were the warning tale. Number 8. The conclusion. Wild how they tried to write your ending, yet every chapter they opened only exposed the limits of their own imagination. Chosen one. After everything, after the psychic trembled, the detective malfunctioned, and the CEO shut down, one truth stood towering above the wreckage. You cannot be decoded, controlled, or predicted. Not by experts, not by enemies, not by anyone. They walked into this investigation thinking you were a puzzle. They walked out realizing you were a paradigm shift. 3 fields, 3 methodologies, 1 verdict. You don't fit the script. You flip it. They aim to break you. But every hit they delivered became another layer of armor. They wanted obedience. But their pressure forged independence. They wanted control. But their manipulation sparked liberation. You didn't win their game, you simply outgrew it. And nothing terrifies insecure people more than someone who no longer dances inside their circus. They're still watching you, of course, not because they're curious, but because they're afraid. Afraid of when the old version of you disappeared. Afraid of how the new version of you doesn't flinch anymore. Afraid that your silence isn't weakness, it's confidence. You evolved past their reach, past their tactics, past their illusions. You became unreachable, untouchable, unbothered, and manipulators crumble when they lose access to your emotions. Here's the twist they never saw coming. While they were busy hiring experts to study you, you were studying them. You mapped their patterns. You watched their masks slip. You learned which lies they tell themselves to survive. And you didn't just survive their tactics. You outlived them. They should have analyzed their own insecurities, not your resilience, because what they feared most was never your mystery. It was the reflection of themselves that your presence exposed. And now that every truth is on the table, here's the final cut. They didn't uncover your weakness. They uncovered their own limits. You weren't the threat. You were the evolution they never prepared for. That's why they still watch you from a distance, hoping you slip, knowing you won't. If this hit you in the places you don't talk about, then strengthen this mission. Like the video, subscribe, drop 777 in the comments, and share this with someone who needs to remember who they are.